Can
Oh,
you?
now I can hear you now.
Okay.
I was like, uh-oh. Uh-oh.
How are you
Oh,
today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well.
I assume you have some slides to show.
Yes. Yeah,
All
I do.
right, I'm going to make you the co-host.
Okay.
That should make it easier for you to share your screen.
Okay. That sounds good.
Da, 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 da. Did it come up on your end then? Or is it
Yes.
just- okay. All right, looks like we're missing a few people, but I'm recording this, so we'll send it out to everybody that was registered.
Okay.
I've actually been surprised how little response we got. We actually hand delivered information to every restaurant in Troy. And
really?
yeah, I've been surprised. I don't know what it is. Sometimes people I think have been scared of any of these programs from the government, but
Right. Yeah.
you know how that goes. So
Right.
let me let everyone in and then we'll get started.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your patience there with our technical difficulties, but we're going to go ahead and get things started. I'm Kathy Roeder with the Troy Chamber, and we just like to welcome you today to our webinar. It's an informational webinar about the SBA's Restaurant Revitalization Fund that was just launched. So I'm going to turn things over to Alex Kohls.
All right. Thanks a lot, Kathy, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me today. So I do have a presentation. There are a number of slides on here, but it'll be a lot of great information. And I do want to just mention right off the bat that I'm not allowed to share this PowerPoint. That was clearly communicated to me, but if there are questions and this is being recorded, that whoever's watching it could pause it when they need to get the information. But most of it should be on our website as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, bring up the presentation. As Kathy mentioned, this is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Became law on March 11th, and they appropriated just over $28 billion for this. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't think this is going to be enough money, but hopefully Congress would then, if they do run out, Congress would reallocate some money to this program once they see the popularity of it. And the appropriations will remain available until they're fully expended. And again, I believe that might be pretty sooner rather than later. Okay, so who is eligible? As the title of the fund, as you can imagine, it is for restaurants, but it does make a lot of other eligible businesses, or a lot of other businesses eligible. That includes caterers, bars, saloons, even bakeries, tap rooms, wineries, and inns. So some of these, as you can see on the list, do have an asterisk, and they have to be able to prove that they, at least 33% of their gross receipts come from food and beverage. So who is ineligible? So this is not for state and local government operated businesses. If you own or operate more than 20 locations, that is not an eligible business. If you have a pending application or have received a shuttered venue grant, then you are also not eligible. So you will need to make an informed business decision whether or not you're going to apply for the restaurant grant or for the shuttered venue grant, but you cannot do both. No publicly traded companies. If you're permanently closed, this is something that I will touch on several times in the presentation. If you're permanently closed, you are not eligible for this program. Now, some restaurants have closed, but they have the intention of reopening at some time in the future. that is fine. But if you have already closed your business, gone through that process, if you sold off the assets, equipment, and are not planning on reopening, then you are not eligible for this. This is also not for nonprofits, and the minimum level of funding is $1,000. So as you're filling out the application, it's going to ask you for numbers. We're going to go over the calculations here in a little bit. And if it's showing less than 1,000, 0, negative numbers, then you're not eligible to apply. How much are you eligible for? You're eligible for up to $5 million per location, or $10 million total for the applicant and any affiliated businesses. And then again, the minimum award is $1,000. So how does this program differ from other programs that the SBA offers? And this is especially true for the shuttered venue grant. You do not need to be registered in SAM. You do for the shuttered venue, but you don't for this fund. And you will not be required to obtain a DUNS or cage identifier number. So that is the main difference between this and the shuttered venue. Happily, the administrator decided against having you register in SAM, because that does add on a week to 2 weeks of processing time on your behalf before you can even apply. So that was a great foresight on her part. So who is eligible? Well, I'm not going to go through each of these, but you can see it does cover a variety of forms of organization that are eligible. 2 notes that I'd like to point out at the bottom: if you're a B corporation, you are eligible, but you would just select either C or S corporation on the application, just depending on how you are taxed. And if you need to try and decide whether you're self-employed or a sole proprietor, that goes by what is on your tax return. So you want to make sure that matches up with what is on your tax form, because then otherwise it could delay or even kick you out of the program if it does not match. Franchisees are eligible to apply for this, but they have to make sure that their franchise is in the SBA's franchise directory. If they are not, they can submit the franchise disclosure document and other agreements if necessary to be on the list so that you can apply. But you can look up, as you can see, the second point there, you can look the entity up in our franchise directory. It does cover the vast majority of them, but there may be some new ones that are not, or even regional ones that may be a franchise that we may not be aware of. So you want to make sure you check that out before you apply. If you have filed for bankruptcy, you would be eligible to apply. It would just depend on a few things. So going down to the second bullet point there, you're not eligible if you have permanently closed, you're not eligible. Now, if you have filed a Chapter 7 liquidation bankruptcy, you're not eligible. And then if you've filed Chapter 7, 11, 12, or 13 bankruptcies and you don't have an approved plan of reorganization, you're also not eligible. So you would have to think about those. If you have filed for bankruptcy, then you do need to kind of go through those bullet points to make sure you are eligible before you apply. So how does the Paycheck Protection Program affect this? Well, what's going to happen is if you have applied and received PPP, so whether it's first round, second round, whatever money you got under the PPP program, that will be deducted off your Restaurant Revitalization Fund amount. As you'll see in the calculations here in a few slides, you'll see that it tells you exactly how to figure out the gross receipts, and then you just subtract off what you receive from PPP, and then whatever's left, that is what you're eligible for. You also need to certify that the current economic uncertainty makes this funding request necessary to maintain operations. So this is not a program set to expand your restaurant, dining room. It's not geared towards doing anything to enhance your restaurant. It's more to help you weather the storm that we are currently in. So what can you use the funds for? There's a host of business expenses you can use this, including payroll, utility payments. As you go down though, you can see business food and beverage expenses, supplier costs, and other operating expenses like insurance, marketing, etc. Construction. If you are one of the lucky restaurants that were able to expand to outdoor seating for the during the pandemic, and you had to purchase either a fence or a wall that goes out into the street or on the sidewalk, plus the additional tables and chairs, those are eligible expenses. The ones that are not eligible are other expansion costs. So if you purchased another building, another room within that building to expand your dining room for the pandemic, that is not an eligible cost. And then in the third column, you can see that business debt is also an eligible expense. So you can pay mortgage obligations and debt service. And that does include SBA funds, including the EIDL loans if you were one of the ones that received that. So how long do you have to use the funds? So the funds must be spent on expenses that occurred or were incurred between, let's see, what's that, February of 15th, 2020 and March 11th of 2023. So you have nearly a 3-year period in which the funds can be utilized to either reimburse for costs you already incurred or to pay for costs moving forward. If you permanently close after receiving funds, the day that you close is the day that the period, your covered period ends, or on March 11th, whichever date occurs sooner. And any funds that are not spent on eligible expenses by the time the covered period ends, so either the day you close or March 11th of 2023, must be returned to the government. So since there is such a long timeline that costs can be covered, again, nearly 3 years, you will have to do some use of funds assessments and throughout that period, just so that we can keep tabs on that this fund is being used appropriately and correctly to help cut down some of the fraud that might be associated with this, as are with all the other programs we've done. So how do you calculate your potential fund amount? So if you have been open or been in operation prior to January 1st of 2019, then you would use calculation 1. This is very straightforward. It's 2019 gross receipts minus your 2020 gross receipts, and then minus any PPP amounts. If that is 1,000 or above, then you're eligible to apply. If it's below 1,000, you are not eligible. So if you began operations partially through 2019, then you have to use calculation 2, which is the average of your monthly gross receipts times 12 minus the 2020 gross receipts and any PPP loan amounts. As you can see on the asterisk below, that if you partially opened in 2019, you could use calculation 2, or as you'll see on the next slide, calculation 3. If you decide to use calculation 3, though, it could require longer processing times. So you would have to make, again, a business decision And it would probably depend when you opened in 2019. If you opened in February 2019, you may want to stick with calculation 2. But if you opened in December of 2019, you may feel more comfortable using calculation 3. And then calculation 3, besides those who partially opened in 2019, have the option that you can, if you began operations between January 1st of 2020 and March 10th of 2021, and it even includes applicants who have not opened yet, but have incurred eligible expenses as of March 11th of this year. So as we all can guess, or probably experience or know offhand, that you don't just one day say, hey, I want to open a restaurant, and just the next day you opened your restaurant. You know, you have to get the space, you have to probably remodel the inside, you have to purchase food, the drinks, set up your supplier lines, hire workers. So you're incurring a lot of costs before the doors actually open. And most of those costs are eligible expenses. And so if you haven't opened yet, but have incurred those costs, that's why those businesses are being covered. And so how you calculate this one is you do the total amount spent on eligible expenses between February 15th of 2020 and March 11th of 2021. Then you minus the 2020 and 2021 gross receipts and any other PPP loan amounts that you may have received. So what do you exclude from 2020 gross receipts? This is a very common question that we have gotten on all the programs that we have offered during the pandemic. So you do not include the PPP loan amount. Obviously, that does come off the amount anyway, but it is not included in your gross receipts. Section 1112 payments, EIDL loans, state and local grants. A lot of cities and counties received CARES Act money that they then turned around and gave business grants out to other to the businesses in their area, and then anything under the FRRP appropriation. So how do you apply? The most popular form will probably be the SBA platform, which is restaurants.sba.gov, or you can do it through a POS vendor, and that would include Toast and I think Clover and Square. And then through the telephone, you can do that as well. There's the number to do that, but just keep in mind, if you go through the telephone, it is going to significantly add a longer processing time because they'll get information from you, then they have to mail you the paper form, which then needs to be filled out, signed, have all the other documents included. Then you need to send that back to the processing center before they can even start to process it. So it will significantly add time. So the best options are the SBA platform online or the POS vendors. So what documents do you need? I'm not going to go through each of these, but obviously you need the application. You need to verify tax information, and that's through IRS Form 4506T, which most of you may have already done for other programs like the PPP or EIDL. And then you need documentation to prove your gross receipts. And those are some of the documents below that to do that. So if you're using calculations 1 or 2, these are some of the documents that you will need to show. If you're doing calculation 3, these are the required documents that you will need to submit with your application. So now, if you are a brew pub, a bakery, a distillery, if you're an inn, you have to provide additional documentation to prove that the 33%, at least 33% of your gross receipts is made up of food and beverage. So these are some additional things you'll need to do, an additional step that you need to do to show that. If you're having trouble with applying or with the portal or just have a simple question, there's a 1-800 number. I've used it even already. I had a question whether or not a restaurant was considered permanently closed or not. I got an answer within 5 minutes. So it worked out very well for me. Or you can contact myself or anybody at your local district office. You go to our website to find your local assistants. And I know Kathy has all of my contact information. And there is help in many languages. I believe in one of our internal trainings, I heard up to 100 languages we can provide assistance to, because we know going ahead for this program that a lot of immigrant entrepreneurs have opened restaurants. And so we've offered this in many, many languages to help them as well. So some of the best practices is provide complete documentation. Make sure that every question is answered. It's answered correctly. All the documents are completely filled out, signed if they need to be, because if you don't, we're going to have to come back to you, and that could delay your processing, which could then jeopardize you even getting any money out of the program. Make sure you leverage your resources, especially accounting professionals or a CPA. That way they can look at it and say, yep, that's the same answer I got, or those do look right, the numbers look right. That way, when you submit it, you feel more comfortable, and it makes us a little more comfortable as well. If you do need to make a correction, you did a wrong calculation, somebody provided wrong information to you, you are able to make corrections, but we cannot make corrections on your behalf. So you'd need to call the center, the hotline, to do any corrections. And then if you, number 4 is kind of irrelevant now, since PPP funding, I believe, has run out, but you are advised to complete your PPP application in advance of the restaurant application. So when can you apply? The first period, the pilot period, is over. These were just several volunteers who helped volunteer businesses. They didn't receive funding, but they went through the whole process to knock out any bugs. And then the priority period is the first 21 days of the program opening. The priority groups are women-owned, veteran-owned, and socially and economically disadvantaged applicants are the only ones who are going to be processed and funded in this period. Day 22, everybody will be eligible to be processed and funded until the funds are exhausted. So a quick note about this one. The application portal is open. You can apply right now. And I suggest that everybody apply, because even if you're not in one of the priority groups, you will maintain your number in line when day 22 hits, and that's how we're going to go by it. So everybody should be applying now. That way they can get in line for the money when it's available. So what are the priority groups? I already mentioned who they are, but they have to be at least 51% owned by a woman, a veteran, or a socially and economically disadvantaged individual. So historically, there have been issues where the husband owns the business, runs the business, does everything with it, but he puts his wife down maybe as 51% owner, so they would have access to either contracts or to funds like this. You have to make sure that they are involved in the management and daily operations. Sometimes those husbands just had their wife down, they have access to it, but the wife had nothing to do with the business. Well, you can't do that. They have to be involved in the business operations. And this is a self-certification on the application, saying that you do meet the requirements. But if we come back and you've been audited or you red flagged and we're looking over your application and we do not believe that that has been done, or you can't prove that you do fall into that group, not only will you have to return all that money, but there could also be criminal charges filed. So the example below, if there are multiple owners, in the example below, you can see there are 5 owners. They all have 20%. 2 owners are veterans. 1 owner is in the socially and economically disadvantaged group. We will consider that group to meet the requirement that at least 51% of the applicant is owned by a priority group. So what are socially disadvantaged individuals? Typically, they are groups such as Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Asian Pacific, and subcontinent Asian Americans, among others. Economically disadvantaged, that's a little more difficult to determine, but it goes probably will be going by where your business is located or where that individual is located. And there's a link on our website to help determine that. If you, going back to the husband and wife example, if you say, the husband's 51%, the wife is 49% owner, and they decide, hey, let's reorganize so that we qualify for the women. So, here's my 2%. So now my wife is 51% owner. You cannot do that. It is going by what you have been in the past, and that will result in automatic disqualification of the award if that is found that had occurred. So here's the list of the funding set-asides for each group, looking at the groups that have gross receipts less than 500,000, between 500,000 and 1.5 million, and then an additional 500 million is set aside for applicants of not more than 50,000. So you're going from the real small restaurants and businesses to the medium size to some of the larger ones. Now we do reserve the right to reallocate the funds if we see one group is really spending down very fast while another group is not. We can reallocate the money so that we can make sure it gets to the most businesses as possible. And that is it for the presentation. So I know that was a lot of information I went through fairly quickly, but it hopefully answered a lot of the questions that people may have. And I hope everybody has a little more insight into how the program works and how to apply.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. Good information. And since we have a small group, I'm just going to allow, if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can just ask Alex directly.
Hi, Alex.
Hi.
Michael Blankenship here with the Trojan Horse.
Okay.
And we just opened back in June of last year. Are we going to be eligible for any of this?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Because we've tried with PPP loans, and obviously you've had to be open since like February. And so we went into our LLC, I believe started sometime in April, but
Okay.
we really didn't, our official opening wasn't until June 4th because of getting everything ready. So
Right.
Okay.
And yeah, so in fact, even if you would have been doing things this year, as long as you had incurred eligible expenses prior to March 10th of this year, you would be eligible. So,
Okay.
Yeah, you
I
definitely.
wish I'd have known that, but it's all good. I mean,
Yeah.
it's good to know though. So.
No, I mean, so yeah, you're fine. Opening in June of last year, yeah, you're definitely eligible.
Awesome, good deal. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate everything you guys are doing, and I'll definitely go through the link here instead of sitting on the phone and going through all that. So.
Right. Yeah, I don't blame you.
I appreciate that. I won't take anybody else's time up. Thank you so much for answering. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Take care.
Kathy.
Do we have any other questions? Well, if not, I want to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you again to Alex for presenting. I will send this recording to everyone, and I will also include Alex's contact information if you do have any further questions.
Great.
So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yep. Have a good afternoon.